Welcome back to The Shed. Today I want to take a look at the 2000 Hugo award-winning novel in Vernor Vinge's A Deepness in the Sky. So I've covered Vernor Vinge in the past on this channel because he won the Hugo in 1993 for his novel A Fire Upon the Deep. And this novel is set 20,000 years prior to the events in A Fire Upon the Deep. So humans have come across this on-off star. And the reason they're calling it the on-off star is because for 215 years of its 250-year cycle, it seems to be dormant and not showing any activity at all. So this has caught the imagination of humans, and two groups in particular have set an expedition force to basically go check this star out to see exactly what's going on. And that is none other than the Quang Ho, which we learned a little bit about in A Fire Upon the Deep, and this other group of humans called the Emergents. So the Quang Ho and the Emergents don't really get on too well, and the Quang Ho beat the Emergents to the on-off star and start their sort of exploration. So whilst in the orbit of the on-off star, the Quang Ho and Emergents start to realize that there's actually life on one of these planets. And that life takes shape of these big arachnid-type alien beings, which they've called the spiders. Now, we learn a lot about the spiders through their television and radio broadcasts because the Quang Ho and the Emergents have had to come to a truce. You see, they had this big old battle up in the heavens of this spider world, and both sides took a lot of damage, so much so that they're basically stranded there. And all they can now do is look onto these spiders. They're literally lurking, spying on them, capturing all their radio waves and television broadcasts, because these spiders are very much in a technology position as Earth is today. So they're sort of just coming to terms with computers and technology and things like, computers linked together like the internet. So we learn a whole lot about these spiders, and the plan is that these Quang Ho and Emergents have made a truce because they're hoping that these spiders can start advancing in their technology in order to be able to provide them aid at some point in time. What's really interesting about the spiders is that the novel sort of alternates between what's happening out in space and what happens on the spider world. And it's really interesting to see what's happening with the spiders because they're fighting with a lot of obsolete ideas and ignorance. So there's this one particular group of spiders that are seen as a rebellious kind of group because they're going against the norm and wanting to live through that dormant period of the on-off star. So we learn a lot more about the culture of these aliens in the process. So we also learn about this fan Chun-Li. He's been living with the Quang Ho, and for those of you who have read A Fire Upon the Deep, you may just remember who Fan was. That's it, the good old Fan Nguyen. So he also plays a part in this novel, 20,000 years to the events that we saw in A Fire Upon the Deep. And we learn a lot of his backstory, which I thought was really fascinating. And Fan Chun hasn't lost his dream, and we actually brought on a journey on his dreams and what he was really hoping to get with the Quang Ho. And he hasn't really given up on that dream that he has of an intergalactic empire. So he is sort of seeing some of the technology that's come out of this emergent group, in particular this virus of sorts called focus or mind rot. And it sort of started as a disease, as a plague with the Emergents, but they've been able to tame it and actually control humans with it. And Pham has seen this, and he's scheming away, trying to make use of this technology somehow to make his dreams a reality. All the while, we have all these aliens on the planet starting to get an idea that maybe, just maybe, those twinkling lights we saw in the darkness may have something to reveal about humanity, as in the spider's humanity. So the scene is set and the question asked, who will ultimately reign supreme in the heavens of the spider world? Would the Quang Ho reign supreme? Would they defeat the Emergents? Would the Emergents and their focused technology overpower the Quang Ho and ultimately overpower the spiders? Would the spiders would they be given an opportunity to advance their technology and their race, or will it all come crumbling down because of the war that is imminent in the heavens? All is really revealed in this chunky old novel. So what did I like? Look, there are a couple of very interesting things in this novel. One of which is that mind right, this virus that the emergents have been able to use to their advantage to basically force humans into these supercomputers almost. They basically infect them with this mind right, this focus. And these humans are basically fixated on one particular item, and all their mental processes is aimed at addressing whatever that problem may be. This also sort of renders them useless as a social setting, but it's rather very interesting kind of technology that's in the book. The other thing I really enjoyed is the vast galactic sort of space opera that this novel is. It took me a couple of weeks to read. It's a pretty chunky old novel, and I'll talk to some of the disadvantages you get in that when you read a rather chunky old novel like this, but I did really thoroughly enjoy the world building. I also enjoyed the spider race, but there were a couple of things that really stood out that bugged me. And again, I will talk to that when it comes to my likes and my dislikes section. But needless to say, the alien beings were rather interesting. So when the dialogue and when the passages in the novel talked to the spider race and what was happening on the planet, I found that section to be really engaging and thoroughly enjoyable. The other thing I really enjoyed as a concept in this novel is the concept of a programmer archaeologist. See, what happens is that, there's thousands upon thousands of years of human technology in this book, right? And it gets to a point where someone somewhere has written code to do one particular task somewhere. And the problem is trying to find that. So we have these archaeologists, these program archaeologists, that instead of trying to write code, they're actually discovering code, going back through the archives and tweaking and modifying the code to do what the new task requires them to do. So I sort of found that concept interesting. I wonder, what if our empire, this Earthlings, did survive another 20, 30,000 years and our technology kept evolving? I wonder what would happen with things like these ancient programs that started things like artificial intelligence. It's a very thought-provoking idea that I really enjoyed in the novel. The other thing I really found enjoyable that is not often seen in novels, but it's a problem that would surely exist, is how do you measure time when you have, galactic spaceships that can fly between stars, and every star has its own measure of what time is. The 24-hour day wouldn't be a 24-hour day for all these planets, right? So I really like the concept that Vernor Vinge deploys to address that problem, because every single thing in the book is measured in seconds. So it talks to kiloseconds or megaseconds or whatever it was, which I thought was very interesting, because we can accurately measure a second. And that would be universal. So I really did enjoy that concept in the novel. One that is, a very simple one, but one that answers a question that I think 99% of books behind me here just never really talk about it. They always sort of say, oh yeah, it's a 24-hour day and off we go. But the other thing that I enjoyed is that this novel, the 2000 Deepness in the Sky, is a prequel to the novel that Vernor Vinge wrote in 1993, A Fire Upon the Deep. And when I reviewed A Fire Upon the Deep, I did a bit of a whiteboard session that describes the zones of thought and how they worked, how the universe is basically structured in Vernor Vinge's language here, right? But because this is a prequel and events took 20,000, written 20,000 years prior to the events of A Fire Upon the Deep, the humans in this book don't really understand how the universe works. But I like the fact that there were still hints to the zones of thought. They got it completely wrong, and it leads to some interesting outcomes for Fan Nguyen. But I did find it enjoyable that he was still able to, mix that zones of thought into a novel that was written 20,000, happened 20,000 years prior. But there's a lot to like in Vernor Vinge's A Deepness in the Sky. But there are some things that I really struggled with. One in particular is the aliens themselves. Now, in my like section, I actually talked to the fact that I liked those passages. When the story moved over to the alien creatures, I really enjoyed it. So why am I talking about it in my dislike section? Well, it's simply this. Those aliens were not aliens, right? They were so human in everything they did, in their names, in their mannerisms, in their science, in their history, in just about everything that you could think of as human is what these spiders did. So I don't know. I just didn't see anything really alien in these spiders that detracted me from thoroughly enjoying this novel. I mean, I would have been happier if these spiders were some long lost human colony, right? Because that's all that really appeared to be. And I sort of found it really difficult to swallow the fact that these aliens were not truly aliens. So this book also starts off pretty interesting, but I've got to admit, there are some sections in this novel that just go way too slow and, dare I say, a bit boring at times. Now, it's a 750 odd page book, but I honestly feel it could have been done in 450 odd pages or so, similar to what we had with A Fire Upon the Deep, right? Similar kind of size. And I'll, just to show you the difference, right? And I think it just needed to be this size, right? So I just found it to be somewhat padded out, which made it boring at times. I also found that there's a cast of thousands, it appears, in this novel, right? But unfortunately, there's no cast of characters in the back or the front of the book that helps you sort of remember who are these people. Because we have a whole lot of Quang Ho, we have a whole lot of Emergence, and we have all these spider creatures as well. And sometimes I found it a little bit taxing to remember exactly who was who and who was actually, was this an emergent, was this a good guy, a bad guy, what's actually going on here. Look, that's a minor criticism, but one that did take away from my full enjoyment of the novel. So look, there's a lot to like in Vernor Vinge's A Deepness in the Sky, so I don't want to detract you. I'm always being a bit overcritical when I talk to the things that I didn't like, because I'm preparing myself to rank it on the Sci-Fi Shed ladder, and I'm trying to be as transparent as I possibly can. Out of the two novels, look, it's a very good novel, and when it comes to the latter, I'll give some of my insights as to which of the two I prefer. So look, when it comes to recommendations, I still highly recommend Vernor Vinge's Deepness in the Sky. There's a whole lot to like, and especially if you like big space operas that talk to very huge galactic empires, warring parties within those empires, and strange alien beings, and even stranger technologies that can be used for good or for bad. So look, there's a whole lot of really interesting concepts in the novel that I think will appeal to people who like those big, large space operas. Now, I first read this novel, it would have been around 2005 or 2006. And I've got to say, there are areas of the novel that I remember quite clearly, but there's big gaps in the plot that it was almost like reading a new book in some areas and not. So it was sort of middle of the range when it comes to how well I record this novel. But I got to say, it wasn't as memorable as A Fire Upon the Deep. That novel there, I particularly liked the aliens, and for me, it was a much more memorable novel, which might be giving us a bit of spoilers when I flip the board around here and we see where this one ranks tonight. So I hope you stick around for that, where I rank it on our Sci-Fi Shed ladder. So ranking Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels on the Shed ladder never gets easy. So just as a quick recap, we've got an A, B and a C side from ascending to descending order. And I've got to say that Vernor Vinge's A Deepness in the Sky is not going to make the bottom lot. Nor do I think it's going to make the top lot. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. And just whereabouts in the middle, we're going to walk through it. So when I look at Vernor Vinge's novel, a good place to start would be A Fire Upon the Deep, that won the Hugo Award in 1993. And which of the two novels do I prefer? And I've got to say that I prefer A Fire Upon the Deep. And the main reason for it is those aliens. Those aliens I thought were truly alien. They had a very interesting way of communicating, very interesting group mind, and they were very much aliens, right? Well, I can't say the same for this. So out of the two novels, I'd have to say Vernor Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep takes the cake for me when it comes to the two novels. I've got to say The Wind-Up Girl, as much as it had some flaws, I overall enjoyed it more than I did Vernor Vinge's. There were honestly some areas in Deepness in the Sky that sort of bored me a little, right? I just couldn't wait to get through those passages because nothing really new was given away. It didn't really progress the plot a whole lot, and I just didn't quite have that same feeling when I read Wind-Up Girl. So I'm going to say I'm going to give it the bit of a tip. The Red Shirts, again, I'm a bit biased with Red Shirts, but overall I found it to be a light-hearted, enjoyable read, and one that I wasn't bored throughout. So I guess that's my key takeaway with Deepness in the Sky. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but there were definitely passages in there that bored me, and that's a bit of a shame, which was never the case with Red Shirts. Flowers for Algernon is absolutely brilliant, but I've said it many times now on this channel, but I don't rate it as a science fiction novel. I just rate it as fantastic work of fiction, right? It's a wonderful piece of literature. I really enjoyed Rite of Passage. Most enjoyable read, never a boring or dull point. The characters were all very well developed. They were all very enjoyable characters as well, where sometimes I struggled with who is this guy again? Is he part of the Emergent? Is he part of the Queen Ho? Right? And so that sort of did take away from my full enjoyment, which was definitely not the case for Rite of Passage. And The Uplift Wars by David Brin, both in The Uplift War and Startide Rising. Now I think the novels, The Uplift War and A Deepness in the Sky, have very similar things as far as they're very big sort of ideas, right? The uplift process was a very big idea, as is, the concepts explored in A Deepness in the Sky. They were also both very thick novels, and they were both very enjoyable novels that sometimes dragged on just a little bit, that I thought could have been much shorter novels. So out of the two, I think they're very, very similar as far as my overall enjoyment. But I've got to say that I did enjoy A Deepness in the Sky more than I did Startide Rising and anything else that we've read to date. So is it going to be better or worse than The Uplift War? And I'm going to have to say, I'm going to give it to David Brin. And I'm going to say that Vernor Vinge's A Deepness in the Sky, overall, very interesting novel, very worthwhile read, very interesting concepts explored. But I've got to say, The Uplift War, overall, I enjoyed a lot more than I did A Deepness in the Sky. This is where we're at tonight. I'd love to hear from you if you've read the novel. Where would you have ranked it? Do you agree, disagree with some of the things I mentioned? Where would you have ranked it? This is where we're sitting tonight. It was a big old chunky novel, so I'm glad you could spend some time with me tonight to give you a bit of an appetite of what you may find in this great novel. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time in the shed.